Have you ever wondered what Jesus had against figs? Or at least fig trees? Well, if not, bear with me because I have. And as we look at this passage today in Mark chapter 11, it's easy in this celebration and in all the events happening in this final week of Jesus' life to miss over this significant interchange. So just to back up a little bit, Sunday, what we call Palm Sunday, Jesus comes in riding into the city, and the people are just ecstatic, and they're thunderous cheering, they're shouting, "Hosanna, God save us," and they're laying palm branches and their own clothes down on the ground for his animal to trod over as it carries him into the city. And then after all that fanfare, Jesus and his disciples go out of the city that night and spend the night in Bethany. And the next day, as they're walking back to the city, we see this interchange. Now, Jesus and his disciples are walking into the city, and Jesus sees a fig tree. And he sees that this fig tree is full of leaves, full of life, and he's hungry. So he goes over to the fig tree and finds out there are no figs. It's not offering what it looks like it is. And so Jesus curses this fig tree. Now, this seems pretty harsh, right, for Jesus just to take out on a fig tree that's just standing there doing its job. But of course, Jesus doesn't do anything by accident, and he never misses an opportunity for a teachable moment. So when the apostles and Jesus are walking out of the city that night, they walk past this tree, and sure enough, it is withered. And to wither an entire tree is something that would take at least weeks during harsh conditions. But here, this tree has withered. So what did this poor tree do to incur so much wrath from Jesus? It does seem a bit harsh, especially when you see that Mark specifically says it was not the season for figs. So, should we go outside and curse our trees that are barren right now because they're not bearing leaves and fruit and buds? Should we curse the ground in the fields because there aren't crops there? Well, no, it's not time for those yet. We would never do that. We wouldn't even be concerned this time of year that the crops are not up because it's not the time. So what's happening here? Well, the apostles knew that the prophets had often compared the nation of Israel to a fig tree. And God compared them in that way through his prophets to say what he expected of them, to look for fruit in them, and also in this analogy of cursing them when they are not following him, when they're not true to him, when they're not blessing him, he withholds his blessing from them. And so the apostles knew, they understood this analogy, being Jewish people growing up with these stories of the prophets. And so what Jesus is saying, and the thing that we don't understand, if you're not a fig farmer like me, I'm not, we might miss the fact that on a fig tree, the figs come first, and then the leaves. Now, for most of us that grow in temperate regions, we're used to orchards or trees in our own yard. We will see buds and leaves, and then we will see the apples or the pears or the peaches or whatever it is. We see the buds and the leaves, and then later we get the crop. But on these fig trees, they would have had figs first, and then the leaves would come. And so Jesus is calling this out. This tree is showing that it has life, is showing that it should have something to offer, and yet there's nothing there. And so Jesus calls the tree out and curses it, just as God had commanded the prophets to do to the nation of Israel. We are not to be showing on the outside that we're full of life and that we are faithful and that we're bearing fruit, when really, if you look closely, there's no fruit. There's no faithfulness there. And all the more, these figs would have borne on the more mature branches, they would have borne fruit early, often, before the season where the rest of the tree would. So the more mature trees would often bear fruit even earlier, and it would be the biggest and the sweetest fruit. And then the normal branches, the younger branches, would bear their fruit later in the normal season. So Jesus seems to be especially calling out those of us who claim to be mature in the faith, who claim to have walked in the faith longer, that we should be showing fruit and not just showing off. So as we go on to watch Jesus through this week, let's keep our eyes open, let's be sober, and let's see, are we bearing fruit in keeping with what God has given us? Are we being faithful to him?